I'm Eric Holsworth, Managing Director of Clean Energy and Environmental Policy at EEI. I'm going to be your host for the rest of the afternoon. Like Brian, I'm also excited to continue to hear more about the clean energy progress and innovation that's going on in our industry. And on that front, it's my pleasure now to introduce Maria Pope, who's going to talk to us about wildfire risk and how companies are partnering with federal agencies and technology partners to use new policies and new technologies to mitigate wildfire risks that are, of course, increasing as the climate changes. Maria, thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. We're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about wildfires and the risks that we're seeing. Just a little bit about my background. I'm president and CEO of Portland General Electric. I've been in and around the utility space for about 15 years. Previously, I was a customer, and in that role, I spent 20 years in the forest products industries. I've overseen operations in Wyoming, the Dakotas, parts of Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, predominantly also British Columbia and some in Alberta. Today, I don't think there is anyone in this room or across our industry that would not say that wildfire is one of the biggest threats to those utilities in the West and maybe to others. We've also seen it as one of our largest rising costs. Today, 44% of this country is in extreme or highly extreme drought conditions. It's really quite remarkable, the summer season that we face. And yet already 3 million acres have burned. If you're in the West, and in any Western state, what you will see is 13 times more incidents of wildfires. Generally, we've had about 60,000 different ignitions and small fires with some major fires throughout our areas. So what is it that causes wildfire? Drought conditions, forests, some that we all live in through the urban-rural interface, the HUI as we call it. You take 100-year-old oak trees and eucalyptus in California. You take pine and hazel and scrub and grasslands in the high elevations of New Mexico to some of the lower elevations and neighborhoods we've seen in Colorado. You take pine trees that have been attacked by the mountain pine beetle, particularly strong in roadless areas of Montana, some in Idaho, eastern Washington, all the way through British Columbia to north of Prince George and into Alberta. The mountain pine beetle used to die off in the wintertime when winters were longer and colder. They need about 20 days of below zero temperatures to not reproduce and to begin to die off. Even in northern British Columbia and Alberta, we're not seeing those kind of conditions that we used to see. A mountain pine beetle will make its way around a pine tree in about 30 days, and that tree will remain standing for about 30 years. There are hundreds of thousands of acres of dead and dying trees all over the West. They aren't just eucalyptus and oak. There are lots of species, and in particular, a big danger of mountain pine. Just 20 months ago, 20% of my coworkers and colleagues were either evacuated or ready to evacuate from their homes. In September of 2020, 2 million acres in the state of Oregon burned. 10 million acres are burned across the country that year. We had the worst air quality in our area on the planet for about a week. And we've all seen the pictures of the Bay Area and what it looks like with that deep, dark smoke and how the sun never seems to come up during the day. Linemen were only able to work in N95 masks and only on the most critical of issues during that period of time. Kids went home from school. Schools, in fact, closed. People were asked not to leave their homes. Our hydro operations on the side of Mount Hood burned as the fire came in. And you saw these transmission lines that just toppled over and virtually melted. And I think it was interesting, we talked about communications. Our communication systems also burned up. And in evacuating the hydro facilities, we let the water spill to be able to maintain the integrity of the operations as everyone went home and was evacuated. We burned up a 100-plus-year-old company town from when those hydro operations were built and initially operated. But one of the interesting things about that period of time as to why the fire didn't just keep on going is there were essentially two forests. There was a forest planted 70 some odd years ago, well managed and maintained, owned by ourselves and the U.S. Forest Service and some others. And then we stopped managing our forests, and another forest came right up underneath. And so you essentially had side-by-side fuel sources, and that's why that fire burned so hot and was so devastating. One of the things that I think is unique about our industry is mutual assistance and our willingness under the toughest circumstances to reach out and help one another. And Puget Sound Energy, Avista, Idaho Power were tremendously helpful to us during this period of time. There is no question that the fire marshals who arrived on the site within a couple of hours were invaluable. We've been preparing for a wildfire. We've been learning for those in California, even from those in Australia and other places. But when you are faced in the moment in those situations, it's very different. And I'll be forever grateful to Pedro Pizarro of Edison International, who spent a lot of time talking with me about what was going to be next for our company, for our industry, for the region. 10 years ago, out of Superstorm Sandy, the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council was founded. That is a group of CEOs who interact with government at the highest level. And I think it's really important that we recognize that what we have learned in the West has been as a result of what has happened in Florida, Superstorm Sandy, and so many other incidents. And that unity of mission and unity of message is so critically important. During the toughest times of events, sticking together between governmental agencies at the federal, state, and local level, and tying that in with industry partners, differentiates utilities and communities that do well in crisis versus those that do not do well. And I will tell you, from Tom Fanning at Southern Company to now Bill Furman at Berkshire Energy, it is drilled into me. Unity of mission and unity of message. And it was invaluable to us in the West. You think of the most critical fires of the 2020, but actually last year was even tougher. The Bootleg fire, and many of you in New England and New York saw some of the smoke that came over from the jet stream all the way from Southern Oregon. That took out the big California-Oregon intertie, the multiple 500 kV lines that are critical to reliability in California and across the entire West. It actually wasn't just the flames, it was all the carbon in the air that continued to cause arcing and made it impossible for continuous operations of those transmission lines. And it actually was the mutual assistance and being able to use the ESCC all the way to the federal government that brought in fire equipment to suppress and move the fire away from those transmission lines. So that on Monday morning, when California's energy usage came back up, the Western grid was still stable. We had a similar event about a month later, last year, at the end of August, about 5:15 or so on a Friday evening, where lightning struck mountain pine beetle killed pine timber in northern British Columbia, took out the transmission lines with that fire, islanding off all of that hydropower that is so critical, particularly in the late summer period across the Pacific Northwest and the West. And we had voltage changes that would take your breath away, and is probably the biggest reliability or near reliability event that we would have ever had. through the Western Power Pool, through the CAISO, through utilities like our
introduce them,
own.
they're gonna play the
We
video
all
and-
rushed in, and within minutes, the grid was stable again.
Okay.
So I think we think about these issues as impacting our local communities. We think about them impacting the West-wide grid. And there are three things that we're really focused on working through with the task force. And I'm fortunate to be able to co-chair that with Randy Howard of the Northern California Power Authority and Dwayne Hiley of Tri-State. And we're focused on preparation and mitigation. And then second, in an event, we're focused on detection. And then third, when you're in an event, on trying to respond and then recover. And so on the preparation side, needless to say, timber harvesting, dead and dying trees out of the right-of-way, vegetation management is seeing an entirely new level. There's no question about it. Everybody at Asplund and their competitors are very busy across the West. There's also an increase in different technologies. You're seeing implementation of ductile iron poles. You're seeing undergrounding, particularly in California. In some areas, that works well. It is still very expensive, and in some areas, it's probably not achievable. So there you'll see covered wire. You'll see a lot more ability to island. You'll see a lot more sensing equipment going in, automation, a lot more weather monitoring. The investment on a cumulative basis into our distribution and our transmission systems is tremendous. And I think you'll see that it will have a huge impact on reducing ignitions from electrical equipment. Just like industry, whether it be the forest products industry or mining or others, ignitions 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. On the detection side is really where some of the science comes in. We're using all of those tools that are in the field, meteorologists and other AI technologists, to be able to really understand the combination of weather conditions, wind speeds, changing wind speeds, and where we might see sorts of equipment or have other issues. And so the monitoring through technology, the monitoring through sensing is giving us situational awareness that we would have never, ever had before. And then finally, the response side. And this is where I think the utilities, all utilities in the West, have a real advantage. We're ground-based. We know our communities. We work with first responders on the fire side, as well as in every other aspect of the communities we serve. We're embedded in their emergency operating centers, and we now have technologies that allow us to text back and forth with customers so that when the power goes out, they know about it, and they know when they can potentially expect it to come back on. In such dynamic environments, being able to have good communication across the entire sector is really important. When one turns the electricity off in rural parts of the West, it isn't just the electricity that goes out, but in many instances, it's the ability to pump water. Water for people's homes, water for fire protection, but also water for people's livestock and animals. So the responsibility that we collectively have, and as we think about all these things and work with our communities, is very, very important. Just this last fall, we did a great exercise, EEI led, as well as with others, but the, government entities at the very top of the federal, state, and local levels, on the United States and the Canadian side of the border, public power, rural electric cooperatives, and IOUs through GridX. And we did a great set of studies for a couple of days on how we preserve the grid, what we do to invest in it, and how we make things better as we move forward. While this summer we face sort of daunting challenges of Mother Nature, we also have come together to learn across all of the entire sector, deploy new technologies, and set ourselves up for reacting to what is a new future as we decarbonize, also dealing with the impacts of our changed climate. So thank you very much for having me today. Thank you.